Welcome back, everybody, to the Malazan knitting classes. And this is a huge step because now we're in Volume 2, Deadhouse Gates, Book 1 today. First of all, we're going to check in with the whole scarf thing. It's grown even more because books are getting longer, and I can't probably hold it up anymore at this point. I can just, put it around my neck, and you can all see that it goes down to, yeah, on both sides. So I be able to go around my neck very soon, and then we'll see how it continues. I just feel that if it's like a bit more purple, I could go full on cardinal or pope on you and declaim my theories and pronouncements of about Malazan fully ex cathedra, and no one will ever say anything against me again. Although I doubt that will work because I'm pretty sure at least Ruth and Bud will find something to disagree with me, which is perfect and fine. So that's that. Nothing new in the beer department, unfortunately. We're still on the Jeva beers. We'll see what happens, but I got one, and let's get into this. Cheers. All right. First things first. From here on out, to make things clear, I'll say volume when I mean the actual published blocks of paper. And I'll say books for the separations within those volumes. So the Malazan Book of the Fallen has 10 volumes, which are split into a lot of smaller books, like 7 books within Gardens of the Moon. It's less with Deadhouse Gates, and that's like the more important part right now. We have less books, but we have more pages. And since we're all math experts here, or at least, slightly used to calculating numbers, yeah, we all know that obviously those books are longer. Much longer, in fact, than those 3 hours in the audiobook. 3-4 hours in Gardens of the Moon. So I'm not sure if I can actually keep to the daily upload, because that would mean me like sitting down for 8 hours of straight reading and knitting every day and then still recording something. I'm not sure if I can handle that or not. So if there will be like videos every other day, then that will be the reason for that. In fact, you already probably noticed that there was like 1 day of break between the end of Gardens of the Moon and the beginning of Deadhouse Gates. Yeah, that's why, among other things. So also maybe I'll have like other stuff I want to ramble about in between those videos, and doing like 2 videos in 1 day is a bit of a yeah, I guess it's a bit too much. So I figured I'll see how that works all in all. So today though, we're gonna look at Deadhouse Gates, Book 1, Raraku, which is the Holy Desert, and probably pronounces it in a different way, but that's how I'm gonna say it today, I think. First of all, yeah, once again, I'll not actually summarize the plot. If you want to do that, go. If you want to see plot summaries, there's some out there that are chapter by chapter. I think Iskar Jarak has one on Deadhouse Gates as well, so go watch his videos. They're better than mine anyway, so you can get much more out of this. I'll try to keep it spoiler free, so I'll not go into stuff that happens in later parts of the same book. So all I say today is basically about Gardens of the Moon and Deadhouse Gates Book 1. Up to that point, I'll make references sometimes to stuff that happened before. So yeah, that's there. But I won't go beyond that. There might be one small thing where I'll say this parallels something in a later book, but I won't go into that into detail. I'll just put a note in there and say there's like parallels, and once we reach that later book, which will be much later, then we can maybe look back at it, and then we'll see how things are there. So that's sort of what I'm trying to do here. Also, book one is already slightly longer, and thus it's like 5 chapters plus the prologue. So this might get more rambly and longer than previous videos on this topic. I hope not, but I can't make any promises because obviously this is unscripted. All right. Then let's start looking at important things that made this first book stand out for me, or that kind of stuck out for me when I was reading it this time round. There's several things in there. There's something about politics that we need to talk about. There's something about agency and weakness, and I might have a different video on that topic in the future. There's a bit about setting, world building, that kind of thing in there as well. And I guess that's sort of most of it at the moment. Yeah, I think that's... Otherwise, we'll see during the ramble. All right, so first of all, we mostly are on a different continent and have mostly different characters. Yes, Fiddler's still there, Crocus is still there, and Uppsala is still there, and Kalam is still there. So the one half of the Bridge Burners group from Gardens of the Moon that went back home to Seven Cities, or technically to bring Uppsala home to her father. Now, the other part, what they're doing is, well, we don't know. And so we basically don't think about them right now. We obviously meet a whole block of new characters, new viewpoints, and so forth. And those will be very interesting to look at over the book, to see what Erikson does with them and how they change maybe the feeling, the atmosphere of Deadhouse Gates from that we had, from the one we had in Gardens of the Moon. Now, there's 2 of those, like, basically new narratives, new plot lines or whatever, that are like completely new because they have new characters and are not about whatever Fiddler and the others are doing. But one of those is around Hissa, with the very important character Daika, the historian, and the other one is the one around Felicin, whatever you say, and Heborig Light Touch, the other historian. And that's going to be like another thing that sticks out, the idea of historians, historiographers, and historiography as something different from differing from the actual happening history, and how the written history then feeds back into politics and stuff like that. That's something that will definitely be present in later parts of the series as well. So we'll talk about that. Then Felicin Paran. We only heard about her in Gardens of the Moon, in that one scene when Captain Ganoas goes home and talks shortly to his other sister, Tavor, whatever, however you pronounce that. And we see her only very shortly, and that prologue when Felicin is among the nobles being culled, by which culled is a brutal word in that regard, but that's sort of what it's supposed to be. When she's like transported on a slave ship and then transported to the Ototaro mines and enslaved there. And I guess before we go any deeper, all the stuff that happens on this plotline, as some other stuff that happens later in the book, is definitely something that deserves its trigger warning about sexual violence and so forth. So, well, the Malazan Book of the Fallen in general is an adult fiction and deals with adult themes, among others. So beware of that. So if you feel triggered by descriptions that go into that direction, by topics that go into that direction, then maybe this is not for you. And I'll have to talk about those things. So yeah, be aware of that. And if you really don't want to deal with that, then switch off the video, I suppose. Okay, now that's out of the way. That plot line is one that a lot of people seem to have difficulties with, and have difficulties with the character Felicin. There is a very good video out there by Graceless Passion on Felicin as a character and defending her and the way her character arc works. I'll link it down below, but be aware it includes stuff that goes beyond Deadhouse Gates. So if you want to avoid spoilers, maybe wait until you watch that video. If you don't care about that or have already read the rest of the series, go right ahead and watch that video. It does a lot of things very well and explains a lot of things much better than I could ever hope to. All right, so let's go into that. Now let's start first with the politics stuff. I think that's easier. All right, so the beginning is we see that from Felicin's side, we see there has been a culling of the nobility. And now, if you know the word culling from somewhere else, decimation might be another word to use for that. It's like you take, more or less indiscriminately, members of a certain group, and culling, it comes originally from animals. That's how dehumanizing it in a way is. And dehumanizing is something that is important here. So a group, a certain amount of noblemen are taken, selected by the empress and the mob, and are killed or not killed. Well, some of them are killed or are imprisoned, are judged for crimes that may or may not have happened, and are sentenced to assuage in a way the populace, the poorer parts of society, and bind their loyalty to the empire. Now that makes sense in a way. The empire is still fairly young. Yeah, I know it's been around for 100 years. That's not the point. It's been fairly young. And before that, you have a traditional feudal system with an upper class and upper nobility class that at this point mostly is like merchants. So it's a commercial nobility, people that have a lot of money and gain power through that. And as in any like stratified class society, the lower classes hate the upper classes up to a point, and you can fuel that resentment. And if you are the actual group up there in power, you can fuel that resentment of the lower classes against that upper class to strengthen your power base in a way. And no, this is a topic I don't want to get too far into, but it's something that has worked in current politics very well for certain almost former presidents of the United States of America, for example. But obviously it is something that is universal. It's like you basically attack the nobility or a small, rich, powerful minority as the person up there in highest power, and thus get the power of the populace on your side. And it's obviously thought through to a very, very brutal end in the Malazan Empire, especially under the current Empress Lacine. It also obviously makes sense to keep that powerful group in check and fear, because that's the part from where danger for the empire actually resides, obviously. So yeah, we see that that strategy that has been around for basically almost forever. We see that, I mean, you can look at the Roman Empire, see something like that there going on as well. It's like you You control the nobility if you have an empire and have an emperor, obviously. And you control them by getting the actual populace on your side. It's just written out more clearly and more brutally and thought to a very brutal end in the Malazan series, or in this action here. We got a first mention of this thing being a thing, the culling of the nobility, in Gardens of the Moon already at the beginning in Pale, where Dujek is trying to avoid it, or at least lessen the blow and make it not as brutal. And now we see it here. Then there's something that just stuck out for me, like the opening scene. We have that scene with the priest of Hood that turns out to not be there. You have basically just this outer shape consisting of flies and nothing inside, it being hollow. And if you've watched my previous videos, you know where I'm going there. It wonderfully resonates with the scene of the hollow armor on the hill with Tattersail there. And later on, Anomander Rake describing his people and his empire as hollow as well. Now you have this situation there with the priest of Hood being an empty shell formed by flies. I'm not going to go too deeply into that here, though. I'm just saying, see how there's like recurring small things that show up again and again in a way and signify or might signify something larger. So we have that political theme here. Keeping like power over a country is a definite thing in this book, and in the first book, obviously, because we will then switch to 7 cities where there is rebellion a-brewing, as they say. And we see how there the occupying forces are not really able to keep the lid on things, right? We there have some like first observations on occupation and how occupation works or doesn't work, how it fails or cannot or does not fail. It's like you look at 7 cities and how it's run at the beginning of this book. You see all the ways that imperialism and colonialism goes bad. You have rich foreign merchants squeezing as much out of the country as possible, ignoring its old culture and not really understanding how rebellion is building. There's a constant fear of the people they are technically ruling. And keep in mind, those people are supposed to be regular citizens of the Malazan Empire. It's not even the fact that 7 cities natives are citizens of like second or third class or whatever. They can become soldiers and fight somewhere else and gain rank and so forth. Like half of the bridge burners comes from 7 cities, basically. Not half of them, but some of them, and it's important. Keep that in mind. But the idea of a foreign power base, of a foreign power taking over and subjugating a country, extracting all its wealth, and ignoring the people living there, no matter how old their culture, is something that we have seen in world history before, and the way that so far it's set up, it definitely rings like closer to like the British occupation of India or the Middle East. Like, it's kind of, I don't want to make parallels, but if you have this country with a really, really old culture behind it that is very religiously informed, and you have deserts and stuff like that, that's kind of the parallels to world history you kind of think of. Also, when we look at the way Erickson described it, something I feel that fantasy authors, really good fantasy authors, have like strength in describing certain things. Like, I'm an idiot, I know very little things. I don't know that much. I've learned a ton, and all I learned, almost everything I learned about botany, like names of plants, I've learned from reading Tolkien, because that's like sort of his description strength is when he describes trees. I don't know how many different trees he names in that book, but it's a lot more than I was aware of previously, at least when it comes to my English vocabulary, because also plants and stuff like that, I feel, is something that unless you study it, you never need that kind of vocabulary. You say tree, and in like almost all situations, that covers it. Um, what Tolkien did for um, botany, for plants, in a way, I feel like Erickson is doing for me when it comes to geography and geology, in a way. Now that obviously also for like architecture in a way, but not that much, and also about archaeological terms, but definitely for geography, because he actually describes landscapes in a way where he puts those geological things into place. Now there was this interesting essay he published a while back on deep time, and it just kind of manages to put that forward really well in this book for me. I mean, yes, it kind of is also there, obviously, in Gardens of the Moon, but it's very much present here when the sheer age and the, like, not only the sheer age of seven cities, because obviously all continents are kind of same age, but there's like a cultured history, that the amount of history there is put in impressively when you have this idea of the tell, which is something that you have in real world archaeology, or when you look at mostly Mesopotamia, where you have like these hills that have like the ruins of several cities, one atop the other, and those are just at this point just hills in the countryside, and then you dig in and there's one city and another city and another city, and then yeah, you fight a war over democracy over that place, or over oil or whatever, and shady people extract all those nice, important archaeological artifacts and sell them on eBay or whatever to the owners of Hobby Lobby or who else. So yeah, that happens, unfortunately, but to see those things show up in the Malazan world makes the world feel more real. The same when Erickson describes how landscapes have changed over time, and there's been an ice age over it, and in this case Raraku has been a inland sea at a time, an older time. It just like, I'm not saying that other people are leaving that, like, don't think about those things, other authors, when they do their world building. I'm just saying a lot of times they just leave it out, and Erickson puts it in, so it gives the descriptions of the geography a lot more depth when you also get something of the history of how the landscape came to be that way. Now, with something like Tolkien, that obviously is more difficult, because a lot of that stuff has happened on a mythological scale, on a magical scale. It's like, yeah, the mountains are that way because the Valar fought a war against Morgoth, Melkor there, and that's the battle was so fierce that the mountains showed up, rose up out of that, or were crushed down and stuff like that. But having the whole feeling of an actual grown geology that happens in a sort of natural way, while using terms that outside of archaeology papers and geology papers I would never read, is something that, yeah, that's sort of what the one thing that the Malazan Book of the Fallen does for me. It's like it actually expanded my vocabulary when it comes to geology. Not so much archaeology, because I've actually read a fair amount of ancient history sources and textbooks and whatnot for my studies, so I had a fairly okay-ish vocabulary there already. But when it comes to geology, damn yeah, that's what I get there. Anyway, that was one of those tangents I didn't want to get on, but apparently, yeah, here it is. Next bit. Occupation and collaboration. Now, this is the part where I say this will come up in a much later volume of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It will come up in Reaper's Gale. So keep in mind that after that we can look on parallels between What happens in Reaper's Gale, and how a certain group, the Patriots, works in Reaper's Gale as to how the Red Blades work in Seven Cities. And now we only have the Red Blades here. And the interesting thing here is the Red Blades are natives of Seven Cities. They're fiercely loyal to the Malazan Empire and the Malazan idea. And one thing that is important to kind of see and understand in the Malazan world is the Empire actually brings a sort of progress, or what you like in air quotes, like what you might call in quotes progress, to a lot of places it conquers. It is a relatively advanced civilization. It brings economic growth. It brings a sort of civil administration that is oftentimes superior to what they find at those places when they show up there, and so forth. So there will always be, and the way you conquer and take over a country and turn it into a colony or otherwise occupy it as an empire, is to find people that will actually profit from your occupation and make them loyal to you. And we've seen one way to do that. We see it in Pale. It's like you call the nobility of Pale and find that ever boiling anger of the general populace against those who are better off and feed on that. But there's also others, like where people actually see that through the change that occupation brings, things might generally slightly get better for a lot of people. Not for everyone, but might get better for a lot of people. And you have those people, in this case, are the Red Blades. They are, for whatever reasons, they are very, very, very loyal and fanatic in a way. Fanatical defenders of the Malazan Empire. They obviously are also in a difficult situation, because as natives of Seven Cities, they are, on the one hand, they are seen as traitors to their to Seven Cities' cause by their compatriots. On the other hand, they'll never be as trusted or accepted as actual Malazan citizens. Well, now we come to that point that while on paper there is no difference between a Seven Cities native and a native from another part of the empire who now lives in Seven Cities, there obviously is in the heads and minds of a lot of people. So they have to be more fanatic, more patriotic in a way than their Malazan compatriots when it comes to working. And they're not almost a mercenary group. Well, they're not mercenaries, but you know what I mean. They're militia in a way. And they are fiercer, are more brutal when it comes to keeping down any kind of rebellion or treachery, or what they see as treachery or danger to the Malazan idea, than the actual Malazan armies, because of that fact that they need to, in their own mind, they need to do that more so. And that is something that you find in real-world colonialism and real-world imperialism. A lot of times you find exactly the same. You find local collaborators, local groups that are fiercely loyal to the occupiers and on their side. And it's going to be interesting to see how that works out, apart from the fact that obviously within the Red Blades we've seen so far, at least some of them are just also very violent people who enjoy their opportunity to inflict pain. There's just always people like that who will, in such a situation, come to the point where they do exactly that. There's this Dune saying of, when you look at the old saying of power corrupts. Well, there's the other way around, that power attracts corrupted people or attracts corruption. You can see that always in all kinds of different ways of what corruption means. In this case, it means that obviously people who are already violent by nature, or by their personal history, have turned into violent people. are drawn to a job that allows them to live out their violent nature in a way, and that's something that we've seen so far from the Red Blades. We've seen more of that though. Like there's definitely nuances in there from what we've seen so far from Lostara Yiel. She's definitely very professional, very ruthless, and very efficient at her job. On the other hand, when you look at her commander, Tene Baralta, there's this like very small scene at the end of the attack on Shaik, where Lostara rides off, and then you see like we have Tene Baralta's. I don't even know if you pronounce it that way. It's how it's said in the audiobook. Anyway, so we have Tene Baralta saying, like in his viewpoint, saying that all the losses he will put on onto Lostara's report. So we also see that the people within the Red Blades are there for different motives. There might be people who just actually believe and subscribe that to the idea of the Malazan Empire. There might also be people who are just in it because they love to actually be violent to other people, because that's just what they personally enjoy. There might be people in there who see it as a way to more power and self-aggrandizement, and are more ruthless in that than maybe others think they are. We'll see. So just, keep a note in there on the way the Red Blades are used, and keep in mind, we'll talk about that again when we reach Reaper's Gale, which will be approximately in, I don't know, March, I guess? Possibly, or later on. Okay, that's that. Historians are an interesting part. We know that history is history and historiography, and I'll use historiography once again for written down history. And history I'll use as that abstract thing of what really happened, which we'll never actually really know, because only those people who were there know what really happened. Once it's written down, it's historiography. It gets slanted in a specific way. It gets narratives layered over it, and so forth. And yes, that's what historians do. And we see how that works. We have the imperial historian, Daika, who is actually becoming more and more active in the shaping of history, as opposed to the shaping of historiography, as he's slowly drawn into Coltane's command structure and takes an active part therein. On the other hand, we have the other historian. We have this cynicist. We have Hyboric Light Touch, who is on his way to the Ototero mines. And yes, those are different approaches to history. The one is the cynic, mostly the cynic, that is Hyboric, and then we have the, I don't want to call him realist, but he has not yet given up. That's like, I guess, the main difference there. It's a general thing that we can see about people's way of dealing with the universe once again. You have people who have built up an ironic, cynic distance between themselves and things that happen, in a way to sometimes self-protect. Let's not forget that. And we have people who tend in those situations to actually take an active part to change events. And Hyboric is more on the one side. He wrote a very cynical, well, we don't know, we have not read the book, but he wrote a history that was critical of Lassine's rule, and has become banned for that, because that's another thing that a group in power tries to control the narrative of how things are seen, how their own history is seen. And that's obviously something that Lassine is trying to do. Now, if you remember when you looked at the first pages of the Malazan Empire, the Malazan Book of the Fawn, the beginning of Gardens of the Moon, what we are reading there, is a history. We don't know book, a historiography in a way. We don't know who wrote it. Well, we know it's Stephen Erickson, within the world, we don't know that. But so the portrayal of those historians is once again historiography in a way. So if you want to go into that meta level kind of thing there, I just find it interesting to look at how those two historians are behaving. They're obviously colleagues. Daika was at Hyboric's trial, and defended him there. And he's now trying to get Hyboric out of the Ototerral mines. Now, Hyboric is obviously in that group with Felicin, and that's something that will be a very important discussion further on during the entire book. We're talking about agency, the limits of agency, and weakness, perceived powerlessness, impotence, and what it does to people. And we see that within, especially the combination of Hyboric and Felicin at this point. Felicin is young and noble. Hyboric is old and cynical, but also handicapped because he has lost both hands during... at this point we don't even know why he has no hands anymore. But they seem to be cut off or something. Which looks like a punishment, obviously. Anyway, so he has this severe handicap and thus a limited agency. He cannot... there's certain things Hyboric cannot physically do. He comes up to the bounds of the universe, the hard bounds of the universe, really hard sometimes. The same goes for Felicin. She's young, she's noble-born, she's basically a kid. She's 14, turns 15 at the beginning of this book. And early on, we see that Felicin then starts selling herself in order to help Hyboric and herself. And Bodin, but I'll keep Bodin out of this right now because he's definitely a very different kind of person. And what I'm trying to focus on here is the way those two interact with each other, Hyboric and Felicin. Hyboric obviously is a person with very strong morals and, on the other hand, a cynical view on his own morals. He sees the flaws in his morals and hates them a lot, apparently. He also is very, very unhappy, to say the least. He hurts from the fact that Felicin is doing something that he objects to on a lot of grounds to keep him, Hyboric, alive. On the other hand, we see that it happens on the ship. We see it later on when she brings him food, and then he then actually throws away the food because he feels that pain. On the other hand, I personally, obviously, we can only guess at the pain that Felicin feels and has to feel through all the things that she has to do to stay alive and help Hyboric. Now, does she have to help Hyboric? Obviously not. She could just ignore him, do what Bennett says. Is it Bennett? Yeah, I think. Go with him and so forth and have a good life. What we mean by good life is like she does not have to deal with Hyboric. But when we look at how people in general deal with their own pain, their own powerlessness, because obviously Felicin has very little agency herself. She's a slave. She's a physically weak person in a way because of her age, mostly. And she has very little agency. Doing what she does and getting, which is something she kind of has to do for herself to survive in any case, but doing it also to help Hyboric and Bodin, but mostly Hyboric, gives her agency, gives her a reason outside her own survival. And yes, she is building up a reason for her own survival, which is to get back at her sister, whom she blames for her current situation. Not unreasonably from what we know so far. But it gives her an outside reason. She does something outside of mere survival something that then can help her sort of, I'm not say feel better about it, but yeah, it gives her an outside reason to do the things that she does. And having outside reasons helps us coping with things. On the other hand, she obviously, the damage, the toll this takes from her, obviously then also comes out in, especially when then Heboric blames her for the things she does, because he's unable to accept the fact that he cannot, fend for himself. Someone else does it by doing things that he perceives as wrong. He cannot just accept that, because accepting weakness is something that is very, very, very difficult. I'll talk about that in a different situation again. So that's why this relationship between Heboric and Felicin is a very, very painful one to watch from the outside. To see what people do to stay alive, to keep at least the illusion of agency, to keep at least the feeling of agency alive is something that we see there very much, and it's something that will stay with us for a while, I feel. And it's, as I said, it's kind of difficult for me to speak about that kind of thing, but yeah, I just wanted to try to explain what I see happens there. It's between those two characters so far. There will possibly be more later on. Obviously, Felicin then goes down the road of numbing herself by alcohol and drugs as well, which is like the next thing that makes Heboric suffer more when he has to still, accept some of her gifts to survive. So yeah, this is not a good relationship those two have there together. I use the term relationship rather loosely here. All right, that's that part for now. I guess I'll get back to the Heboric Felicin situation later on again, and other stuff around that as well. Now, let's continue. What else did I want to speak about? Once again, religion is something that I find a very interesting phenomenon within the Malazan universe. That might be something of a rough break here now, but I kind of remember that I wanted to talk about religion. This is going to be also freeformish, obviously, like everything else. And so, what do I mean by religion? Now, we have gods, we have ascendants, we have we learned something at the end, near the end of book 1 of Deadhouse Gates. We learned something that we might have guessed earlier on if we were like super smart and actually read attentively. But we kind of get it fully confirmed in book 1 of Deadhouse Gates that Shadow Throne and Cotillion are in fact Kellanved, Emperor Kellanved, and Danther, his assassin buddy. And they were not killed by Lacine, but in some way managed to escape their assassination and ascend and take over the realm of Shadow. Now, how they did that is something that I will not get into, because no spoilers, no lore, nor nothing. But we finally have the confirmation, even without like more lore stuff, that yes, the process of ascension, of ascendancy, means that mortal persons can become gods. Now, what is the difference between a god a god and an ascendant? Are all ascendants gods or not? That's one thing I'm not going to go into here right now. The interesting part now is we have those people which are, as I said in previous videos, which are basically just superpowered humans, like superhuman beings, but are still bound by the same rules that govern the entire universe, the entire Malazan universe, that fundamentally differentiates them from a god like the Christian god that we know, that is outside of creation, outside of the cosmos. How does religion work here? How does religious prophecy work in this case, in a world where we know so much, so many facts about that? Yes, we can obviously worship certain ascendants slash gods to get power from them in return. You get set up this whole like kind of role-playing game based power structure of priests that then get direct powers from theirs and from their gods and so forth. We get all of that, but how does that interfere with religion and belief and faith? Because apparently Seven Cities is very much about religion. It's very much about faith. We have the idea of traditional pilgrimages. We have a prophecy and a goddess that will raise the whirlwind and then do unmentionable things and so forth. But what does belief actually mean in a world where I actually know that certain gods exist and have certain powers? Like, I don't have to believe that after my death I will enter, go through Hood's gate and enter Hood's realm, and everything will be however it will be in Hood's realm. I don't have to believe that, because I can just, find a powerful mage who can actually get me into Hood's Warren, and I'll just look at the stuff. Or I can go into the Shadow Realm. I know those people are actually there, and knowledge is fundamentally different from faith, from belief. And the interesting question that I still kind of have no full answer is how that problem, which is probably a problem that only I see, or not only I, but very few people actually care deeply about, is solved within the Malazan universe. What's the actual need for religion, for religious belief and faith in a world where most things about the gods are actual certainty? Does ritual, like traditional pilgrimage and so forth, mostly boil down to rites that confirm a certain identity, connections to a certain tribe or whatever, and the rest is just similar to like Greco religion, where religious acts are basically ways of making contracts or deals with gods, which is definitely something that's going on here. But how does that change compared to actual like religious faith and belief? And that's something I'm thinking about a lot, and I have not yet found a like good answer on how something that is more akin to modern day, and by modern day I mean like current religious belief, as compared to something very traditional as in Greco-Roman mythology. I'll probably do something on Greco-Roman mythology parallels to Malazan at some point. That point is not today, because today I'm going to finish this right now because I've rambled on way too long already. And I want to get back to reading and knitting and all the other fun stuff that I usually do, like printing out 100 shipping labels and sending off a ton of CDs and vinyls and tapes to China, Russia, the US, Australia, and other places. So yeah, I'll see you real soon with another video, maybe already the one about Deadhouse Gates Book 2, The Whirlwind, or something else. Who'll know? Who knows? We'll see. We'll find out together. Until then, cheers.